Hey everyone, welcome back. I haven't recorded a video in a little bit, mainly because of a few different circumstances. One, with winter coming in, it got cold and it also got cloudy. And on the nights where I have had clear skies, I've been trying out a whole bunch of new equipment and really having a lot of fun with that, but haven't really gotten my arms around all of the additional processing and new techniques I'm working on there. So once I have a little bit more of that in hand, or the weather warms up and it's a little bit more comfortable to be out there doing this, I'll have some more kind of hands-on type videos. But one thing I thought would be fun is to take a little bit of a look back over 2018 and kind of my learning curve in astrophotography here. And this really isn't just so that I can step through my stuff and try to show things off. I'm hoping that for those that are interested in getting into the hobby, I know that when I first kind of came into it again last year, I was having a lot of trouble with kind of getting intimidated by the images that I would see out there from other folks and wondering, can I do that? And then I take my first images that didn't come out the same way, and it's very easy to get frustrated. It's also very easy as you start going down the learning curve to wonder how much is there left to go. And to be perfectly honest, that's a road that never ends. But I think that there can be a lot of little milestones that you can look forward to and things that you can say, okay, I think I need to get to this step, and how long will it take me to get there? And that's something that I'm hoping as I kind of step through what my year looked like and how things changed up for me. Hopefully that'll help someone who's really looking to get into this get an idea of what to expect. So to start off with here, I'm just gonna pull up my iCloud album of astro photos, and this was kind of the first image I took this year. My son had unfortunately gotten bitten by a snake and was at home for a few days as he was recovering, and it meant that if I was going to be homebound, maybe I should break my telescope back out and try to get back into this photography thing. And so this is a stacked image. Yeah, you can kind of tell because of these little blurs that are coming off here. So I was doing what I should be doing. I was taking images and I was stacking them. I was getting them aligned. And boy, I wasn't super happy with this result. What was going on here? If I went back now and reprocessed the original data, I would probably come up with something that looked a little bit better, at least in terms of color. But this was really just the baby steps. At the same point in time, I took the following image. This is a fantastic example of the Whirlpool Galaxy. I know that because I remember taking it. For folks on here, this may look like just two random stars, right? Once again, this was a stacked image. I did what you're supposed to do to come up with a good image, and this is what I'm getting at the beginning. At the time, this was with an older CCD camera that I had that I did not know how to work very well. And at the time, I was using this telescope, the CPC 800 from Celestron. The images I just showed you should not be taken as an example of what you get with this telescope. It is a fantastic scope for what it is built to do. It's really good for visual. For visual, if you look at what we've got here, it's a very sturdy tripod, incredibly sturdy base, dual fork design, an SCT Schmidt-Cassegrain design telescope, which gives you a lot of aperture, which means a lot of potential magnification for the aperture and focal length. In a really relatively compact package, but that compact package is also heavy as all get out. It's two large pieces with the scope always included, right? Your mount and your scope, mount head and scope are always together. So you're looking at lifting whatever it is, 40-ish some odd pounds plus as a single unit when you lift this, plus another 30 or so on this here. And because you couldn't do it in steps that were each, lower weight and whatnot, it's a lot to carry in and out of the house. So regardless of how much, what you can do photographically, it's just heavy, right? It's just hard to take in and out all the time, and to take on the road when you want to, even though it is, pretty easy to use. visually. So, there's an adage of the best telescope that you can get is the one you're going to use the most. And the fact of the matter is, I never used this one that much. I loved it. I loved the ease of use of it, but I just couldn't be brought to bring it in and out of the house all the time. And when I used it for photography, I didn't know how to make the most out of it. So around that time, I said, okay, well, deep sky isn't working so well for me. But I was like, well, that CPC 800 really is suited well for planetary, so I'll start doing that. And so over the course of the summer, I started taking some planetary photos. Now, these aren't the best in the world, but, for summer of 2018 versus where I feel like I am now, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I was using my my DSLR camera hooked on the back, shooting some video of this and running it through some of the freeware that's there to kind of stack up images. But my focus wasn't great on this. I've got color shifting at the top and around the bottom, that kind of thing. And with, like anything, you kind of go, well, what's making this image do this? You do some reading online. And that's when I got, an atmospheric dispersion corrector and started playing around with it. Right, and that led me to getting better pictures of Saturn. I literally jumped up and down when I got this and finished processing it, and you could see the Cassini division all the way across. Then as Mars was approaching kind of its closest approach, I believe around, I think it was end of July, if I remember correctly, July 31st-ish. I started taking pictures of that. This one's really blurry. There was a nice dust storm going on. But as that approached, I really started diving into how I could work with planetary photos. And, this was my final Mars the day after the approach. It's probably a little over-processed, but for me, this was fantastic. I actually have definable details on Mars, right, that I took with my 8-inch scope from my front yard. And that's around when I was like, okay, I think I can do this. What do I need to do? Let me take another stab at that deep sky work with the rig that I had. And, with that, I also had a Hyperstar lens, which is another piece of kit that you can get for those Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes that reduces the magnification but lets you gather more light more quickly. And with that, I was able to start taking some additional pictures. So this is this nebula here, a lot of times called the Witch's Broom Nebula or the Veil Nebula. This was one I took with that Hyperstar. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here, while this is much better in terms of sharpness and the colors coming out, I really did a lot of just reading up on how to work with your camera, right? How do you color balance something, right? How does this piece of software work? What are some of the pieces of software that you should use, which I'll go into here later on in the video. And so that let me, get a lot more out of this. And depending on how you're looking at it, and let me try to see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Nope, can't. Depending on how you're looking at it, if you crop this image in, this can be something you can be pretty happy about. But some of the things I noticed, if you notice very light kind of background here, very dark here, this is the vignetting that comes in pretty heavily using a Hyperstar system. I'm still actually working through that on whether or not I want to shoot at Hyperstar or in a different kind of format. And so I definite improvement, felt a whole lot better about this, but I knew there was further that I could be going with it. Another image from that same time is this one of the Lagoon Nebula, where I'm getting the inside here, but you can just see all of the noise and kind of mess out here trying to get everything balanced together. And a lot of this comes from learning how many exposures should you take on your system and what kind of calibration files do you need for your camera. Things like dark frames where you're trying to subtract out just the noise inherent in taking a long exposure in your camera, or a flat frame where the software can actually look at the vignetting for the way your scope and camera are set up and remove those and correct those in your photos. But I wasn't there yet with this. Still, in some ways, kind of artistic, but once again, if you crop in, there's definitely more there. And, wow, all my friends and family say, I can't believe you could get that from your backyard. So definite progress being made. But the biggest problem with that CPC 800 is that it is an alt-azimuth mount, which means it turns left, right, up, down. And as we all know, if we look up at the sky, that does not turn exactly at a nice 90-degree angle from straight ahead, right? You've got the North Star and the North Celestial Pole, and things rotate around that, which definitely, it is still at a right angle, but at a right angle from your latitude as it relates to that North Star. So in order to really track the sky, you need a different kind of mount. And that's when I moved to an equatorial mount. This is still a Celestron. This is essentially the exact same setup I had, just changing the mount component of it. So I sold the CPC 800 to a good home, and I used that money to invest in, if you look at Celestron's website, would be the AVX 8-inch setup. So this is their AVX equatorial mount, or advanced VX, and an 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. So the same tube that was on that 800, and just a different mount for it. Now with this one, you can see the angle that it's at is corresponding to my latitude, and then it still turns at the right angle here and here, but it does that based off of the angle of looking at the North Pole. And so I set that up again and started taking some pictures. And to be honest, things were improving. When it's tracking at the pole level, then you can go for a longer exposure. And already I could see, okay, I was getting better here. I was getting some better details. Things were, I was learning also how to color balance better. And my images were starting to come out better. I wasn't feeling too bad. This one's cropped in, I think kind of pushing the exposures to a couple of minutes here at this point in time to get a little bit of the Crescent Nebula, that kind of thing. And, one thing that SCTs are great for is taking pictures of the moon. This one was just a quick snapshot. And I won't step through every picture in my library here as we go. But, started trying to push it. And on the Dumbbell Nebula, I was starting to feel a lot better. And that's when I started making the leap in processing as well. So these same images that I was kind of looking at before, I was able to take a little bit longer exposure on the Swan Nebula, and then that original Dumbbell and the Swan, I went through and really tried to learn how to work with some of the processing tools after you've stacked things together. And that's where I was able to get this Dumbbell from that original Nebula image and this Swan here. And, same images, but I feel a lot better about the colors, more vibrancy in them, brought out a little bit more. They certainly still were early kind of processing works. It was around that time that I was also going, okay, well, that's the 8-inch scope. That lets me zoom in, pretty well overall for planets and the moon and stuff. But everywhere that I look says start with a small refractor. That's your best chance of success early on. So I said, okay, and I kept looking at sales and used items and stuff until I saw that the Explore Scientific ED80, which is an 80 millimeter, very small refractor telescope, was on sale, or in this case on clearance because it was a little bit older model. So I went ahead and bought it and took a shot on it. And everybody had said, oh, this is a very easy way to start out and learn. The problem is that there is a difference between one of these and an SCT, and a lot of it really comes into how you focus. Because a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope focuses by a mirror that's in the back here, so when you turn the focus knob, the outside of this doesn't change at all. It's really the inside changes. Well, when you are dealing with a refractor telescope, the focus here actually moves either the eyepiece or the camera in and out. So your space from the beginning of the telescope is really the critical important piece. And that was something I didn't understand when I first bought this. So a telescope like this, I think, has something like 300 millimeters focal length. And regardless of all the other things you use focal length to figure out, the first thing that you can really know by focal length is how long from the actual lens or primary objective of that telescope do I have to have my camera back. If it's a 300 some odd millimeter focal length, your camera is going to be about 300 millimeters away from that initial lens, no matter how small the rest of this tube is. And I say all that because for me, when I finally did set up this particular camera, I ran across a problem of I could not get my camera to focus. And after going back and forth on learning how this worked and working with the folks that sold it to me, this was the final setup I got to, where I have that initial telescope and then spacer ring, and then another spacer ring, and then another spacer ring, and then attach in, and then I get into the field flattener and the actual connection into my camera. Well, look at this. I've got almost as much on the back end of my telescope as I do at the front end in terms of length. This is where I attach it to balance. And basically what it came down to is I was having a real hard time getting this telescope with a camera on it to even balance on this tripod. And if you can't balance, it's a lot harder for that telescope mount to keep everything in the right spot while you're taking these long exposures. And so after a lot of hand-wringing, I went ahead and returned this scope, and instead, not the fault of Explore Scientific. They were trying to build something that fits into a carry-on bag. I just wasn't prepared for what was entitled to really make this an imaging scope. I went for kind of their next size up. This is their 102 millimeter, so a little bit bigger aperture. But notice right off the bat, right, this feels a lot longer, right? Because it's not meant to be an incredibly short tube telescope. So once I went to that, it became a lot easier to set this up on that AVX mount. You can see, much longer here, but it balances right in the center. And the amount of gear off of the back, this is the focuser here, and then I've got kind of one spacer in the back to get to the right spacing for the camera. So much, much better in terms of the amount of extra gear I needed and, getting it all to balance up. At the same point in time, I'd moved into things like auto guiding, where you use the finder scope and a small camera on that to help track the sky better. And all of that started leading to the next series of images, where I was able to start tracking things longer and longer. Now these are all still from the backyard, still learning, working with filters, exposure times, things like that. Andromeda again a little bit later on, and starting to get some more success and feeling better about what I had coming out. At the same point in time, I was able to take some more kind of lunar pictures. These other ones are a little bit older, so I'm going to skip over those. And then getting into, okay, well, what can I do with filtering, right? So, this is that same setup, and then adding in some additional filters for light pollution suppression, right? So there's some that are a little bit more pure light, just light pollution to leave you with more natural color, and some that are more like narrowband ones. I've got another video on this channel about how to take images from light polluted skies. It goes a lot more in depth about narrowband filtering. But what that really let me do is, get further in on taking better pictures. So you can see my stars have gotten much, much better. This isn't really all about switching to that new telescope. Most of this was about adding on the auto guider and learning how to use the software in that, which I'll talk about in a second. And there I got the Bubble Nebula. At this point I think I'm pushing to 3, maybe even 5 minute long exposures. Cocoon Nebula, similar kind of thing. And at the same point in time, that was great. 3 or 5 minute exposures. That's awesome. That let me start going deeper into the sky than I'd gone before. But that's a long amount of time, and I, as I said in my very first video on this channel, I'm lazy. I want to see stuff right now. Well, one of the benefits, even without doing the auto guiding, by having that refractor telescope, which is a shorter focal length than what I had on the SCT, allows the scope to gather light more quickly. And combining that with the cameras that I had, which I'm a CMOS camera person now, since I switched off that initial CCD. And one of the nice things about CMOS cameras, which are the same kind of sensors that you have in your iPhone or in a DSLR point and shoot type camera, is that you can adjust what they call the gain settings. And that's kind of like a little bit of a built-in amplifier into the imaging that comes in. And so this next image is one that I took with that. Now, this is a very noisy image still. There's lots of noise in it. But the beauty of this is that this is about a 5-minute total exposure made up of about 15-second sub-exposures. So what that means is I turn the gain up on the camera, in the words for like using a DSLR camera, I was shooting as a very high ISO type level, and then did just 15-second exposures. Now the great thing about a 15-second type exposure is you can do that on like the original scope that I had. It's just the focal length was so long that it didn't gather light as quickly. So some of these smaller refractors that are running a smaller focal ratio and a smaller aperture, resulting in a lower F number, so like F5, for example, instead of F10, allows you to get more in a short amount of time. And then using specific software to help stretch these things, really bring out the narrow part of the image that has all your data in it here, is something that you can do with short exposures. And by using short exposures, you can get more of them in a short amount of time and use software that will stack these things together live. And I'll show that when I get to the software section as well. And so this, not only did this only take about 5 minutes to get, I was also able to see this final result within about 5 minutes. And that's something that I couldn't really do when I was taking a bunch of images and just processing them after the fact. So that's something that really opens up for fun. And I've got another video on the channel here that has some of that kind of exploratory, just browsing around and setting stuff to high gain and seeing what we get out of it type work. So, additionally after that, I was able to take, this is a longer exposure one using some very specific filters. This one I talk about at length on how to get it in my capturing images from light pollution skies. But the problem is that also doesn't help you too much with galaxies. So this one was shot without those filters, several hours of exposure time. I was very happy to be able to get this galaxy here, get Triangulum, but as you can see around the sides, it's not great in terms of the background, but I got what I was looking for. And you compare something like that against something that has heavy filtering on it for nebula, which you can do with these broadband or these narrowband filters, and obviously it's a night and day difference of what you can get out of it. So at that point it becomes an issue of, okay, what can I do to get around my skies? Because I'm really loving the images that I can get when I'm doing this narrowband filtering, but I can't do that for a broadband target like a galaxy. So on a galaxy, I've either got to take a lot more pictures for a lot more time and really get a lot better at my processing, or I've got to go to a dark sky location. And that's really kind of where I got to with that, was that I really need to go to dark sky. And I played around a little bit more with taking some pictures of the moon and stuff and getting higher and higher resolution on that. But that was what I needed to do. So I still am taking, these kind of other photos from the backyard using the filters and things like that. But I wanted to go and see what I could get with deep sky. And that's really, why I started to do it, set up a trip to go to our astronomy club's dark sky location. That's where I started getting images like these. And I've got another video kind of going over the comparison between backyard and dark sky locations and what you could expect to see differently. So I won't dwell on that too much here, other than to say that this is when I really felt like, oh man, I'm really starting to get there now. It isn't just that I need more equipment or something. It's that I've really starting to get the kind of images that I wanted to get. At the same point in time, right around here is when I decided to upgrade my mount. So as I had shown before, I went to that AVX mount from Celestron, and this is a workhorse mount. It's probably the most popular entry-level equatorial mount for serious either observers or imagers out there, but it's a little weight limited. Once you get past about 12 or 13 pounds, you start running to the max of what this thing can handle and still track the sky really, really well for photography. For visual, it can work a lot better up to 30 pounds is its rating. But I want something that was a little bit heavier duty, as well as something that maybe I could hold on to for a longer amount of time. So once again, I sold this off, and I do recommend doing this. Get some equipment. Try it out for a little while. Get some success with it. But if it isn't something you want to keep forever, then don't. Resell it. Cloudynights.com. It has a great classified section, and it's not only a great place to buy used equipment, it's a great place to sell it as well. And so in that case, maybe this is an $800 or $900 mount. You use it for 6 months, and if you sell it for $500 or $600, you basically rented it for a couple $100s. And that's not a bad deal if you take it out a lot and you really get a lot out of it and you learn a lot, most importantly. So the mount that I went to after that is the CEM60. This is from Ioptron. Celestron's made to be easy to use. I would say Ioptron is trying to do the same thing, but they're a different company, and they're not necessarily an industry leader for kind of the grab and go, plug and play type mounts. But they've made this not too bad to use. But most importantly, what they've done is they've made it very, very steady and stable. This is a different design. It's what they call their Z design here. And I won't go into that too far because I think I'm going to do a review of my entire setup here once I work out a couple of the additional things that I've been playing around with. But suffice it to say, the 60 in it means that it can handle up to 60 pounds. So kind of rule of half, it could handle about 30 for imaging pretty well. And so that handles my gear much, much better. And I've also got that on a little bit different tripod called their Tri-Pier, which is a different design that's a good deal more stable than the standard Celestron tripod was for that other mount. So that really allowed me to say, okay, I think I'm ready to kind of go to some dark sky stuff. So as I had shown before, some of these kind of nebulas, these are hard to get with any kind of filtering done in a backyard setting. So this really allowed me to take those filters off and start getting a lot more for a short amount of time. Most of these photos were total exposures of less than an hour, right? And these were all kind of done in one night as I went through them. So a lot more color, a lot more detail in there over time. And so that really sold me on, okay, there's more I can do in the backyard. And so the last leap I made was moving from pure color imaging, these are all done with just color cameras up until this point, to monochrome or black and white imaging. And with that, you do that with a filter wheel. I'll probably have a longer review on an overview of kind of how my setup on all that works. But I've gotten a few images into that so far. This one's probably my favorite at the moment. This is, obviously a black and white image, but this is through a hydrogen alpha filter of the California Nebula. And I'm just super happy with how this came out in terms of contrast and the level of detail that you're getting in this. All of that, I love it. I love it. Love how this is working. And then what you can do with those black and white ones is filter in different images, and you can combine them together into false color images. So this is a close-up of the Crab Nebula and one I've done of the Medusa Nebula. So just still getting started, but so far pretty happy with the level of detail that can be brought out in these. Also, like most other photographers went around, I got really excited about the lunar eclipse that came up, towards the latter half of January of 2019. And I was able to capture this image This is through that same Explore Scientific 102 refractor telescope. This is about the size that it gets put in the image window there. And, you know, this is a stack of several images together. But I also I did a lot of things. I did a time lapse, which I may end up, I probably auto post on this channel here when I get a chance, of, you know, a picture taken every 15 seconds or so, as well as a lot of kind of playing around with, once it got to the totality here, getting some really nice images. And my final image that, this is probably the first one I need to print out and frame up on the wall, is looking at the eclipse overall. You know, so starting and ending at full moon and kind of watching as it went through all the phases of it. So, you know, comparing kind of where I am there, you know, or with this one here against where I started at the beginning of the year. This is from June to January. That's what I'm looking at here. So that's a pretty big difference. That is not because I am the best that's ever done this by any means. That's because I just decided this is something I really wanted to get into, and I was willing to try, and I was willing to fail and try to get a little bit better whenever I could. I probably went outside for, once I got away from the telescope that was kind of too heavy for me to feel like bringing in and out of the house, I probably went outside probably 80% of the really clear nights that we got this year. So I wouldn't expect this to be something that you're going to go up that same learning curve unless you're willing to kind of put in the time outside. I mean, you know, there's a lot that you can learn inside, a lot that you learn online, but, you know, every time you learn something, you've got to get that night where you go out and you just try it. And probably the best piece of advice I can give you is to go outside assuming it's going to fail and being happy about that. Assume that you are going to take a picture that looks like this and it's going to be kind of crappy, right? But know that that's what you want to do. You want to go out and take that crappy picture so that you can see if the one thing that you were trying to be better about this time is going to work, right? And once you're able to do that, you'll know that one thing. And then when you go out to take the next photo, hey, the stars are now more in focus. I'm starting to get a little bit better. Here's the piece that I need on my gear next to make it a little bit better. And then when you get to that point, then you can move on and see, you know, what the next one's going to be, right? Or saying, tonight I really want to try something closer to live view and really want to give that a shot and see what I can get out of there. Or I really want to try out this new filter along with long exposures, as long as my gear can go, and see what I can do. And the first night that you do it, you may not have anything that you want to keep, but maybe that second night you do it, you get it right? And, you know, and then you're ready when you start saying, okay, now I'm going to do a trip and I want to go out to a dark sky location. You know, now I want to shoot 5 targets in a night. So I can come out there and feel a whole lot better about going through and taking pictures of several different targets in one evening, because I've gotten a lot more comfortable. I've figured out how that one thing worked and then the next thing worked and that kind of thing. So when you do finally go out, it's kind of old hat at that point. So that kind of sums up kind of my journey through there. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to go through the software that I've been using throughout the year. So I started, I was really interested in that live stacking capability. You know, what I was showing for, I'm sorry, let me get back to that image, for this one here. Taking short exposures and really seeing that image get better and better over time. So I started when I purchased the ATIC or ATIC Horizon camera using their Infinity software. I recommend that software to a certain extent. It was very easy to use, and it did give me some good results. But it's not necessarily as full-featured as what I'm going to go over here in a minute. Plus, also notice that that particular software isn't getting updated as much. So, you know, just looking at the change log for the ATIC software on their site You know, their latest release is from August of last year. Well, August of last year, I've come a long way since then, and so is the software that I've been using. It's been, you know, most of the software that I've been sticking with has at least had a major version release in that time, if not several, you know, bug and patch fixes since then. And the Infinity software is still new enough. It's only a year or two old, or a couple years old at most, that there's definitely room for more features. And I've just been noticing it's been updating a little slow. Still good software, and if you have an ATIC camera that works with it, I recommend that you try it out. But what I really moved to was SharpCap. SharpCap originally was kind of designed for capturing planetary images, but SharpCap, and especially SharpCap Pro, have done a lot more for being able to do live stacking, and they have wide camera compatibility. I use currently what I really use with SharpCap is a ZWO camera, and they have kind of native functionality built in, which means you get to tweak all the little settings for the camera from the software directly, as opposed to dealing with drivers outside of it for ASCOM or something like that. And this is kind of my tool of choice when I want to live stack something. And it can be a really, really good way to help get in there. It's got some focus aids and some tools for helping to collect flat files or dark files, and it's relatively cheap, right? And the upgrade to SharpCap Pro, now this is in pounds, it's £10 a year. That's pretty cheap. The you know, SharpCap Basic, if I remember correctly, is free. So, you know, a very cheap, or I don't want to say cheap, I want to say it's low cost piece of software with a lot of features in it, as well as in their support forums, Robin, who's the developer of SharpCap, is very responsive. You know, but that helps me out when I'm doing a session on a particular target and I want to kind of watch it build up at once. But what I'm really gonna, if I want to set up my equipment all night, get a plan going, make sure it's kind of working, and then I want to go to sleep because I have to work in the morning, that's where I start using Sequence Generator Pro. Sequence Generator Pro is designed specifically for folks that have a decent amount of gear, want to set up a plan, and let that plan execute. You know, so that's really what this is for. It allows you to set up all of your gear. You know, you could have automatic focusers, guiding cameras and scopes, you know, motorized mounts, telescope domes, weather sensors, things like that. You can attach all of that to this piece of software, and then run a program, you know, run a sequence through that will go through and utilize all of that to the best of its ability. So, you know, if you want to take 3 hours worth of exposures on one target, and then once it's gotten a little low in the horizon, move over to another target and start taking another 2 hours of exposures on that, you can set all of that up in a window, click run, and then I would recommend watch it, because something at the beginning probably won't work right because of Murphy's Law. And once you kind of get through it and get good with it, you get to the point where you can kick it off and let it run. Coupling this with a piece of software like TeamViewer or VNC, you can remote desktop control your laptop that is running your telescope and imaging from your iPad, and sit inside where it's nice and warm, watching it all happen on your iPad. And that can be pretty fun. You know, that can be really nice, especially when you know that you want to take a lot of images, but it's a Wednesday night. You know, maybe you get it set up all before 8 p.m., let it run, and, you know, look at it a little bit throughout the evening, and then go to bed feeling like, yeah, pretty good chance it's going to keep going well throughout the whole night. Additionally, I mentioned earlier about being able to keep the stars round by tracking, right? The mount helps you a lot, but really, at the end of the day, you're going to want some guiding software and a camera that'll work with it. So in this case, you take your finder scope, you have a camera attached to it that's a small, you know, hopefully pretty sensitive, but not necessarily the beefiest camera in the world. And what it does is this: it'll find a star in this, you know, in your field of view. It'll lock onto it and it'll watch it. And this software is able to watch the movement of that star. If it moves a pixel, sometimes even less, well less than a pixel, it'll notice, oh, that's moved, and it'll send these little push commands to move it back in line to try to keep as straight a line as possible on what's coming through on your image. And the straightest that line can be on all fronts, the tighter and rounder your stars are going to be in your image at the end of the day. PhD2 is what I use, and it's free. It's free and open source. It integrates with SG Pro. It integrates with SharpCap. So I highly recommend. This is the gold standard for guiding. There's other things out there, but the vast majority of people are using PhD2. Then we get into processing. So if you notice, these pictures that are up now are better than mine. So as I said, there is always way longer down the rabbit hole you can go, either in terms of equipment or just skill in processing. A lot of people have images better than mine with just, less expensive or less sophisticated equipment, just because they've spent more time perfecting things like focus and processing after the fact. PixInsight is what I use to process my images now, but it's expensive, right? This is going to be several $100s worth of software. So I would recommend you don't jump into PixInsight until you've really gotten bit by the bug hard and are ready to go down a real long learning curve. This is not only is it not cheap, it's also not super easy to learn. There's lots of tutorials out there on how to learn it, and a lot of people that do classes and things like that on how to get the most out of it. So if you do get into it, it can be very rewarding, but it's not for your day one. Day one, I would recommend Deep Sky Stacker. Deep Sky Stacker is free, once again. So, combining PhD2 and Deep Sky Stacker, those are two free pieces of software. Normally, whatever camera you have will come, as long as it's not DLSR. DSLR, sorry. My brain got hit on the juxtaposition of the letters there. Whatever camera you have, as long as it's not like a Canon or something like that, will likely come with some capture software as well that's free. I know ZWO does. I know that Attic does. So couple that with Deep Sky Stacker and PhD2 guiding, and software side, you're actually kind of covered. That'll give you enough to stack your images together and do some very, very basic finishing work on things like color and stuff. But before you go to PixInsight, I would recommend you take a look at nebulosity. This is developed by Stark Labs, which is really Craig Stark. He's a PhD in, I believe, neuroscience, but also an avid astrophotographer and coder. But one of the reasons why I like supporting Craig Stark is not only is Nebulosity a pretty good program, the features that it has are pretty straightforward and it doesn't overwhelm you with too much, but also Craig was the one who came up with PhD guiding. He was the original author of that, and he always kind of made it free for folks. PhD2 kind of sprouted off of his original creation there, and has kind of become dominant overall. But I feel like supporting Craig is something that all of us in the hobby should do for good karma. But it's also a pretty good piece of software, and it's at $95 to begin with. So not too bad for coming in. And this will let you not only do your stacking and things that you would do in Deep Sky Stacker, it's also got a decent amount of those processing tools to get you some decent images to begin with. And once you've kind of worked through that, you'll have a better idea of if you want to go further into a PixInsight or a Photoshop or something like that. So that's really, the gist of kind of what I wanted to go over here today. And by gist, I mean the very, very nitty-gritty detail of all of it. But I hope it was insightful for you guys, and we'll let you know that there's a lot more that you can do, but don't let that stop you from doing something and getting started. Take those small pictures. Find the things that that help you out a little bit here and there. And honestly, find the things that you just find fun. The reason why I'm starting and ending with this picture here is this was one I took during the eclipse. And this is not what the eclipse looks like, right? As I said, I took a bunch of images and I was doing some things around a time lapse and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I was doing is I had to hand align some of these files. So I'd go into Photoshop and I'd lay one in, and then I used a tool they call Difference in Photoshop to help me figure out when these things were lined up. And one of the things it does is it does color checking as well. So these are kind of differences in colors. And I was kind of getting lost in the weeds. I was doing one frame at a time on top of another frame, and and I'd line them up, and then I'd move on to the next one. And then just at one point in time, kind of blinked a few times and looked and said, "That's actually really pretty. I love kind of the color range of this, and and kind of the little flare coming off of here. All this just was really, really pretty." Is this a scientific image? No, it's a difference of two images taken about 15 minutes apart. The coloring is all just coincidental based on the exposures and things like that. I did not plan to take this image. Is it a fantastic image of the moon? No, it's nowhere near as sharp as it could be because it's a difference. It's finding out what's different between the different exposures. But I think it's gorgeous, and I just love how pretty it is. And so I encourage you guys, don't get lost in the forest and trees here, right? Enjoy the things that you can get at any level, and know that there's always more that you can do, but stop to smell these roses along the way. That's really what's going to give you the interest and the drive to go further in the hobby and learn more and more. So that's it. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.